Good morning, all you good morning, Tigers. Mr. Grimm again, week 8. And I wanted to continue to talk about alcohol this week. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about alcohol affecting family and society. And so with alcoholism, alcohol abuse really is defined as having too much, having alcohol too often or at the wrong times. And over a period of time, which varies between people, people can develop a loss of their drinking behavior, loss of control of their drinking behavior over time, which means that they can't really control how much they drink or how often they drink or when they actually do it. And so these two things, alcoholism and alcohol abuse, kind of develop over time, and they vary in terms of intensity between people. So in the textbook, they kind of give a little timeline here. So we have problem drinking, where a drinker cannot drink alcohol in moderation or at the appropriate times. Maybe they do it at different social functions where alcohol is not permitted and sneak it or that type of thing. And then the next part is tolerance, where a person, their body actually gets used to having alcohol in the system. And so they actually need more alcohol in order to feel the same effect that they felt from the previous time that they drank. And then over time, this can develop into dependence. And that's when the person feels like they physically actually need the alcohol in order to be able to function daily. And they can also emotionally feel like it. They may feel inadequate or have low self-esteem to a certain level where they feel like alcohol boosts their confidence or their esteem or that type of thing. And then as that progresses, they become both physically and emotionally addicted to alcohol. And then the struggle becomes learning how to just live without it if they decide to get treatment. Otherwise, if they don't decide to get treatment, then they just try to be able to make it through each day with whatever level of alcohol they feel like they need in order to function. Okay, so here are some of the risk factors. Number one is age. Teens are especially vulnerable, and I think that this this plays out because you guys are, as teens, you're developing habits, and so the things that you do from the age of around 15 up until around 27 or so, you've got that 10, 12-year period there. Studies show that if people start drinking at age 15 rather than up at age 21, then they tend to have difficulties stopping alcohol use later on. I guess you could say that they're alcoholics over time. But the point is that they continue to use alcohol to self-medicate later on. I would say that that's because they're starting at 15 and they're learning habits and ingraining these habits of being able to cope with daily stress during that time. So during 15, 16, 17, 18, all those years, you guys are going to be developing your habits. And to me, it makes sense. That's why we're trying to get you to look at all of the different areas of life and set goals for yourself to work on your daily habits, to be able to cope with things emotionally, socially, all of that kind of stuff. But teens are especially vulnerable for developing habits of self-medication if they begin early. And then the reason that a lot of teens do that, and I've read it in your journals too, is that who you hang out with really matters in terms of the habits that you're starting to develop. So if you're surrounding yourself with a bunch of people who are not pressuring you to drink, then you're probably going to be less likely to do it. And it's another risk factor, meaning that if you're hanging out with people who are doing it all the time, they're probably encouraging you to do it also. And there are several different factors for that. The next thing is genetics. I put you inherit your nature and your behaviors. A lot of times the people who discuss this talk about nature versus nurture. Part of it is you're genetically predisposed to alcohol use. or to alcoholism. So like once you start, it affects your body in a certain way that makes you more dependent on it in a quicker manner. And that's the biology part of it. The behaviors part of it, the coping, is you're learning how to cope with things through your family members and through your whoever is bringing you up, whoever's raising you. And so if they tend to use alcohol to cope with situations, it's likely that you're going to have pressure to do that as well. And so that's just kind of how it plays out. That also goes with personality. And I was really thinking a lot about all of those, according to the Myers-Briggs, the 16 types of personality. And the book mentions people who are risk takers or who like adventure, or who may be, a lot of times people who are really good at things think that there won't be negative consequences, and so that can play into it. But on the other hand, you could just say that people with low self-esteem would tend to use it to cover up their emotions. So there's lots of different reasons why people would use them, and I tend to doubt that there is a lot of, that there are certain personalities that tend to develop alcoholism more, but I don't know for sure. So I put a question mark there. What I got from the textbook down at the bottom was people can have the cards stacked against them, meaning that maybe they're a teenager and that they are hanging out with people who drink a lot, and they have family members who drink a lot, and maybe they have a risk-taking personality, but that person still technically has a choice to choose whether to drink or not. And I think that it's important to recognize that every person has a choice in what they do. They can decide yes or no. And so what's nice about that is that even if the cards are stacked against you, that doesn't mean that you are inevitably going to be a person who self-medicates or develops a problem with alcohol. It doesn't have to play out like that, even if you're surrounded by all of that negativity, if you will, or that tendency towards using substances like alcohol. Okay, so some of the warning signs of alcoholism is when people start drinking to deal with anger, frustration, disappointment. I'll just kind of read through the list here. You might notice your friends leaving your friend group and they start doing things that they never have done before. And maybe those things and those people that they're chasing or the people they're trying to hang around with are very different from the people that they had hung around with before. And it's maybe not necessarily a good thing. Another warning sign could be that if, let's say you told somebody, man, I'm worried about your drinking, or geez, you really drink, seems like you drink a lot. They could become really defensive about it, which would mean stay out of my business. Like, who are you to tell me what to do? That kind of thing. A lot of times people will feel really depressed. And so that could be a function of them actually having withdrawal symptoms or being hungover from alcohol, or it could just be they're depressed about other things, and so then they start using alcohol more. The next one is drinking more for the same high, and that speaks to the tolerance, like being able to, it could be framed that way. You could be able to drink more. Somebody could say, oh, I can drink much more than this other person. That's not necessarily a good thing. Because what that's saying is that their body is used to alcohol and they need more alcohol for that same effect, even though they can frame it up like, they're stronger than somebody else or something like that. The next one would be drinking alone or drinking to get drunk. Turns out that there are people in the world who can drink alcohol and have just one or two and they don't actually like to get drunk. And then there are other people who, as soon as they start drinking, they want to get to that level of intoxication where all of their cares and their feelings are kind of suppressed and gone. They want to get to that drunk state. And then another warning sign would be experiencing memory lapses as a result of drinking alcohol. And a lot of times from discussions that I've heard among teens, people kind of brag about that, or they frame it up like, oh, I got so drunk that I don't even remember those things that were going on, and laugh about it. I don't remember, oh, right below, difficult for people to see in themselves. This is characterized as denial. And so when a person is laughing about the negative consequences of the alcohol use that they've engaged in, we can characterize that as denial. Or if they're missing a lot of these points within their own life and they don't actually see it, we can characterize that as denial. And that's just their inability to look at themselves from the outside. And so those are a lot of the warning signs of alcoholism. Now, talking about alcoholism and family, we can describe a little bit how family members suffer. So the family members that are with an alcoholic a lot of times can think that the person's drinking is a result of the other person's action. So, a child might think that their parents are drinking because of them. And that could happen, maybe the person who's drinking says, if you didn't stress me out so much, I wouldn't drink as much. It's very easy for a kid to feel like it's their fault if that blame is being put on them. Another thing is that people who are living with an alcoholic have to deal a lot of times with unpredictable behavior of the alcoholic. So we're talking mood swings. If the alcoholic is going through some sort of withdrawal symptoms, maybe they haven't had a drink in 24 hours, and so they're feeling really grouchy and angry and mad, and then all of a sudden they're super happy because now they have alcohol. We're talking about this kind of unpredictable mood swing behavior. Another thing that can happen in families is violence, and I haven't done the research on it, but I've heard through the news that there has been a rise in domestic violence during this COVID-19 shelter-in-place mandate. We'll look into that in just a minute. And then neglect and isolation is something else that can happen, where the alcoholic in the family is, if that person is the parent, they could be not paying attention to the needs of the kids, and the kids could feel neglected or actually be neglected or be isolated from everybody else within the family. Now, along with all of that stuff, we have enabling and codependency. So enabling is when a person who's living with the alcoholic can do things to help the alcoholic avoid negative consequences. And even though we're saying they can help them, that it's not characterized as a good thing. What we're talking about is, let's say an alcoholic wakes up in the morning and they're so sick that they can't go to work that day. They may tell their family member to call the boss for them, and it could be under threat or something like that. But basically, we're talking about getting a person in the family to lie for them or to cover for them in a way. And so even though we say they're helping them, it's not necessarily a good thing. And then for codependency, that is what the person who is living with the alcoholic starts to do, is that they become codependent on the alcoholic and they start ignoring their own needs in order to take care of the alcoholic. So they may decide not to go places. They may decide to give up money for that person and that type of thing. Okay, let's see. So I've kind of framed a lot of this as the adult being the alcoholic within the family. Well, teens can be alcoholics also. And so there are some ways that can cause stress on the family. One of the things is that if a teen is an alcoholic, meaning that they've been using alcohol and are starting to lose control of their ability to control their behavior with it, they're engaging in illegal activity. It's illegal to be under 21 and drinking. And so when that happens, when a teen is engaged in illegal activity, that can cause stress on the family members. The parents and the siblings always kind of worried at the back of their mind that that person is going to get in trouble in some way. And that kind of leads into the teen, thinking about the teen now. If they're trying to not get caught because of the illegal activity, most of the time they're going to be lying to somebody. And so if you've ever lied to anybody, you know what it's like, is that it's kind of eating at you from the back of your mind that you're not really like living with integrity. You're not really being the person that you want to be, if you were being completely honest with yourself. And so you're lying to avoid these consequences. And that creates a whole different level of stress, which can affect your self-esteem and that type of thing. And then a lot of times in families, what happens is, let's say a parent confronts their teen about their alcohol use. Teens can become angry or even abusive, throwing things or hitting or screaming and that type of thing. And so those are some of the dynamics of a teen being an alcoholic. Okay, so the next part is alcohol in pregnancy. And if a person is pregnant and they are using alcohol during that time that the fetus is developing, that can affect the way that the brain and the body are developing of the fetus. And so we're talking about a syndrome called fetal alcohol syndrome, when a baby is born with physical and mental defects. And these are things that they're biological. That's the nature part of it. And that person who is born with those defects are going to have to learn to cope with those defects, whether it's learning disabilities or physical disabilities and that type of thing. Okay, so that's kind of within the family. Alcoholism also affects society. And so there's a couple of points that the book brings up that I'll talk about. Emotionally, a lot of people can be affected. Let's say that there is a car accident or a car wreck that's due to alcohol. One of the frustrating things I would think for a first responder or a police officer is that it is preventable. The person who was driving or caused the accident due to alcohol didn't have to be in that situation. There was a choice that could have been made. And so when first responders or police officers or other people have to deal with an actual car accident and seeing death or people who are broken, for lack of a better word, but maybe not dead, then that can cause a lot of emotional harm and scarring. And so overall, society is affected. Physically, with violent crime, a lot of times with violent crimes, robberies, muggings, beating people up, that type of thing, alcohol is involved. And then financially, missing days of work or money spent on treating alcoholism. This could be through insurance companies or that type of thing, but families can miss out on their paycheck if the person who is addicted is constantly calling in sick to work. And so it also affects a restaurant. Like, that's the example that came to my mind. Let's say you go into a restaurant and you get really poor service because the whole restaurant staff is slammed because they had several people call in sick to work that day, and maybe those people were hungover. Just an example that I thought of. There's probably other examples out there. Okay, let's see. The good news is that alcoholism can be treated. There's lots of support out there, and that's good because people who are alcoholics need a lot of support. There's several different ways that support can be given. One of the ways is through treatment programs with inpatient. So inpatient is one of them. That person who is in an inpatient program, let's say they're in a hospital, they would be going through withdrawal symptoms. Could be pretty severe depending on how long they had been drinking and what their actual problems were. But they'll also need a lot of counseling through that time too. And sometimes people will stay for 28 to 30 days or so, sometimes longer, 60 days, depending on the severity of their alcoholism. And then outpatient programs are sometimes called 12-step or support groups. And those you may have heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. There are lots of other ones out there as well. We'll look into a website in just a moment. But basically, people who are going through alcoholism treatment are learning to live without alcohol. And if they have developed their coping mechanisms to use alcohol, then that can be a really long process before they can feel comfortable being themselves. down at the bottom here, I have Al-Anon and Alateen. Those came out of the Alcoholic Anonymous programs, but those are support groups for people who are living with alcoholics to be able to go to and to share their stories in order to get that shared experience of people who are trying to cope with life without alcohol. Okay, so looking into current events a little bit, I have a link here to alcohol.org. I did a little Google search on COVID-19 and alcoholism, and I pulled this little excerpt that with the threat of COVID-19, a person with problematic drinking behaviors may face anxiety, loneliness, alcohol-related decrease in immune system, and the possible infected susceptibility to infectious processes. So the immune system is affected. Alcohol travels through the body and affects every cell. And so we're talking about affecting the immune response as well. And then one of the other things that they're saying here is that people who are on lockdown are drastically restricted access to alcohol. And that may be that they don't have money, and so we're talking about possible crimes being committed in order to get money. There's lots of different ways that this can kind of play out. I like what they put down at the bottom here. It's important to acknowledge and understand that the challenges that people are facing, that it's really important to understand that people who have been self-medicating and during this lockdown time are facing special challenges. It's important to recognize those things. As we've been doing our journals, you've seen how important it is to really focus on identifying emotions, and it's no different for anybody else. Like, we're all the same in that capacity. So it's important at this time to recognize that people are struggling with things. Okay, I think that's it. What is this, 20 minutes long so far? We'll go back through all of those things. I don't have any more research right now, still waiting on the latest MedCram. But that's about it. And there we go. I don't know how else to end this, so we'll just end it like that. I may or may not decide to do one tomorrow, but yeah, we'll see. Okay, hope you have a great day, Tigers. If you feel